welcome. You're watching the India Development Debate. I'm Tamanna Inamdar, and today we will start with our top story that focuses on India's growth and the global growth. There should be no speculation or doubt now that we are in the middle of a global slowdown. The IMF became the latest international agency that forecast a cut in India's growth from 7% in July this year to 6.1%. So almost a 90 basis point cut in India's growth forecast for 2019, in line with what other agencies are also saying. Moody's, in fact, has forecast our growth at 5.8. They have slashed our growth forecast to 5.8 just a few days ago. The World Bank has reduced our growth forecast to 6% just a couple of days ago as well. This is in line with what other agencies are saying. The RBI, in fact, has expected India to grow at 6.1% versus 6.9% in FY20, and the Asian Development Bank also sees India's growth forecast slashed from 7.2% to 6.5% for the year 2019. The OECD as well sees our growth down to 5.9%. So if you look at the whole range, we are seeing a range from 5.9% to about 6.5% between all of these agencies. S&P, another agency, at 6.3%. So what does this mean? The important point to notice is also that all of these agencies see a slowdown in global growth as well. In fact, from the IMF's perspective, even though India's growth is slowing down, it is still going to be one of the fastest growing nations in the world, tied in with China. Both of the forecasts have been cut to 6.1%. And what are the reasons for India's growth cut? Well, let's listen in to what Geeta Gopinath, the chief economist at IMF, said today.
In the case of India, there has been a negative impact on growth that's come from financial vulnerabilities in the non-bank financial sector, and the impact that's had on consumer borrowing or borrowing the small and medium enterprises. Appropriate steps have been taken. There is still a lot more that needs to be done, including cleaning up of the balance sheets of regular commercial banks. So in our projections, we have that India will recover to 7% growth in 2020. And the premise is that these particular bottlenecks will clear up. I mean, on the fiscal side, in the case for India, there have been some recent measures, including the corporate tax cut. There has not been announced anything about how that will be offset through revenues at this point. So it looks optimistic, the revenue projections going forward. But it is important for India to keep the fiscal deficit in check.
So what do we really make of what the IMF has said today and what all of these global agencies are saying today? So two things are clear. All of them are saying that India's growth will be lower than was earlier forecast. This is something we know ourselves. The RBI has also made a similar forecast. They're also saying that the world is slowing down. And one of the key reasons for that is trade wars and trade barriers taking place in different parts of the world. Brexit is also contributing to it. So where does India sit in this context? To speak more on this, I'm joined now on top of the show by top economist Rupa Chanda, who has had a long career. She's worked with the RBI, with IIM Bangalore, and of course with the IMF as well. Ms. Chanda, welcome to the India Development Debate, and thank you for speaking with us this evening. How do you look at the slew of international agencies, and of course the IMF has been the latest today, that has cut India's growth forecast to in the ranges of 5.9 to 6.5%. What are the common thread in the reasons that these agencies have spoken about?
Okay, so before I say something, please let me correct. I have not worked at the RBI. I'm RBI Chair Professor in Economics at IIM Bangalore. Okay, so just to put that on record. The main reasons are, if you look at the immediate reasons, it's the investment slowdown, it's the consumption slowdown, the fact that, you've had two shocks to the economy. I think it's really the demonetization and the GST shocks that are sort of feeling their way through. Compounding that has been the NBFC crisis and the problem with retail loans. So that's also obviously affecting consumer demand. And then you have particular sectors such as automotive, real estate. Some of them are structural reasons. Some of them have been driven by particular policy changes. So it's really a combination of all of this. And then the larger context, which is what's happened in terms of global trade wars, what's disrupting value chains around the world. So it's a combination of both domestic factors, certain shocks which have internally hit the economy, and the external environment that's really playing out. Now, having said that, I don't think we should make a big deal regarding the IMF projections, because we've been seeing this over the past few months, right? The data has been coming in and everybody's been revising their projections downward. I think what's worrisome to me is that there's still an overall uncertainty about where the government's taking the economy. I can see the sort of measures, in terms of reductions in corporate taxes, or the efforts to bring down interest rates to revive the demand in the economy. But I think there is a lack of an overall vision going forward. There's still uncertainty. People are not really sure how these are going to impact on future growth. I know the IMF has talked about a revival in growth. We're still going to be among the faster growing economies. But 7% and all, I'm not so sure that, a year down the road, fiscal, in 2021, we are going to necessarily go up to 7%, because a lot of these measures, to what extent they will be successful, say, for instance, the rate cuts, to what extent they'll be successful in reviving demand, I'm not really sure, because the transmission has been poor. You repeatedly see the, Reserve Bank governor trying to urge the banks to pass this on. There's the trade-off with the savings rates, the deposit rates. Until they can come down, banks, given the NPA situation and so on, are not going to be able to cut their margins further. So I think there are a host of structural issues which have to be looked at, and these sort of cyclical demand measures, or pumping in more consumption into the economy through subsidies or more public welfare sort of distribution schemes, etc., may not be the right way to go in the long run. So we have to, along with addressing the immediate problem, also look at the long-term sort of structural sources of growth issue. And for me, that's really what will bring you back to sustainable higher growth, not these sorts of measures.
Okay, so some important points there. We have questions about an overall vision, which becomes important from a global perspective, because India's revival, expected and hopeful revival in 2020 will drive world growth as well. So, Ms. Chanda, let's come to the reasons. Are you seeing what's happening in India in line with what's happening all around the world, or are our problems, to put it very simply, our own and perhaps of our own making?
As I said, to a large extent, the problems are of our own making. The GST, the poorly rolled out GST, the impact on particular sectors, for instance, of a very high GST rate, the automotive sector, for instance, demonetization and what it's done to the real estate sector. Now, there's been cleaning up, but there's also been a slowdown. And we can't deny the fact that there has been a liquidity crunch post the demonetization. I mean, recent work by Geeta Gopinath herself, along with others, has shown that. So, I think a lot of this could have been avoided. It was a weak economy on which you hit with two domestic shocks, policy shocks. I think that's really the bottom line. And yes, it's been compounded by the international trade wars. It's a little difficult to say. I mean, the US-China trade, you can say that China's growth is getting affected. External demand slowing down will indirectly affect India, but we are not as integrated as we think. We've increased our integration. So our competitiveness and other challenges which don't enable us to take advantage of, in fact, the space that's been created by China is our own doing too. So I would really attribute the slowdown more to domestic policies, lack of investment in a lot of structural issues, including the financial sector, in the infrastructure area, and in skilling in particular. I think the lack of focus in the area of skilling and investment in human capital is what's really going to pull our growth down in the future. This is my own take on this.
Spoke a bit about, what needs to be done. In fact, the IMF has spoken a bit about what needs to be done. They focused on stress sectors like auto, real estate, the NBFC crisis, which has lent itself to this situation. They've asked for land reforms and labor reforms, etc. Do you think we need more specific demand-side measures right now? Simply put, putting more cash into people's hands, especially in rural areas. This is one of the things which has been suggested even by Abhijit Banerjee. Let's increase the Narega, etc. Do you think these are immediate buttons that can be pushed?
Well, we'll definitely have to push these buttons immediately. But what I'm saying is that, the room for some of this is also a little limited. We'll have to then forego on the fiscal consolidation path to some extent. And that's where the trade-off is really going to come. Where is the money for increasing some of these handouts, for increasing subsidies, for increasing public welfare schemes? And you've also reduced the corporate tax. So unless you believe the buoyancy in the economy is going to be so great as to offset all this, I think the problem is going to arise on the fiscal deficit side and reduction of public debt. And that will affect our sovereign rating. So there are multiple trade-offs here. So I don't deny the fact that you have to do something, cut interest rates. We are not facing a problem with inflation right now, so there is scope. Oil prices, given weak global demand, that's not going to be a concern. So there is some policy space, but yes, what will have to go is the fiscal path. So we have to accept that, and hopefully 2 years down the road, once growth revives, some of these sectors pick up and revenues again pick up, maybe we will correct. But that's where my concern is.
Thank you so much, Rupa Chanda, for speaking with us. Top economist, laying out what India needs to do. Important takeaways: the world is going through a slowdown right now. India is as well, but the world's actually, in a sense, counting on countries like India to pick up in 2020, which can push everyone up. That was, of course, the big story that we're focusing right here on the India development debate, but the mega debate coming up next after this very short break. 6 days to go before the Maharashtra and Haryana polls. Is it even a contest? What are the key issues that really matter? And what does the election picture emerging right now tell us about how we are functioning as a political democracy? All of that coming up next.